On Christmas Eve, my wife, the CEO of the tech empire I built, suspended my salary and froze my promotion. Her condition? I had to apologize to her new boyfriend, Julian, for making him feel uncomfortable with my presence. I looked her in the eye and said 2 words. All right. She thought she had broken me. She thought I would beg. But by the time the sun rose over Manhattan, my room was empty, my ring was on a dresser, and I was on a one-way flight to London. When her father realized what I had done, he didn't just get angry. He went pale. "Please tell me you didn't send the email, Liam," he screamed. "Please tell me you didn't trigger the clause." My wife just smirked and asked, "What clause?" She was about to find out that while she owned the title. I own the code. Welcome back to Inspiration Seeker. If you enjoy stories about karma, resilience, and sweet revenge, please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and comment "I know my worth" down below to join our community. Now, let's get into the story. I stood near the periphery of the Grand Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, gripping a glass of lukewarm champagne that I hadn't taken a sip of in 20 minutes. The room was a sea of black ties, designer gowns, and the kind of forced laughter that only money can buy. This was the annual Christmas gala for Vortex, the tech company that was currently the darling of Wall Street. Everywhere I looked, I saw the fruits of my labor. The holographic displays near the entrance, my design. The algorithmic trading software that had tripled our revenue this quarter, my code. But nobody here was looking at me. All eyes were glued to the center of the room, where my wife, Victoria, was holding court. Victoria was stunning. I'll give her that. She was wearing a crimson dress that looked like it was sculpted directly onto her body, radiating power and arrogance in equal measure. But she wasn't standing alone, and she certainly wasn't standing with her husband. Locked onto her arm was Julian. Julian was 24 years old, fresh out of business school, and had a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror for hours. Last week, he was an intern. Yesterday, Victoria had announced his promotion to Vice President of Marketing, a role he was woefully unqualified for. And tonight, he was parading around the gala as if he owned the place, whispering into my wife's ear while she laughed a little too loudly. I watched them navigate the crowd, accepting compliments and toasting to their success. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, not heartbreak. Exactly. That had burned out months ago. This was something colder. It was a realization that I had become a ghost in my own life. Eventually, the crowd parted, and they made their way toward the VIP section where I was standing. I straightened my posture, expecting perhaps a nod or maybe a brief introduction to the investors surrounding them. Instead, Victoria stopped 3 feet away from me. She didn't look at my face. She looked at my hands. "Liam," she said, her voice cutting through the ambient jazz music like a razor. "You're just standing there doing nothing. Be useful, will you?" Before I could process the tone, she unbuttoned Julian's heavy cashmere overcoat. She slid it off his shoulders and thrust it toward me. "Check this at the cloakroom," she commanded, loud enough for the board members nearby to hear. "And make sure they have a priority ticket. Julian hates waiting." Julian smirked, a greasy, condescending twist of his lips. "Thanks, buddy," he said, patting my shoulder as if I were hired help. "Careful with the lining. It's imported." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at the coat in my arms, then at my wife, the woman I had promised to love and cherish, the woman whose career I had bankrolled with my sleepless nights. She wasn't looking at me with love. She was looking at me with contempt. "Well," she snapped, "go on." I didn't say a word. I simply turned around and walked toward the exit. But I wasn't going to cloakroom. I was walking toward the end of my life as they knew it. I didn't make it to the coat check. I walked about 10 feet away from them, spotted a waiter carrying a tray of empty champagne flutes, and unceremoniously dumped Julian's expensive imported coat right on top of the dirty glasses. I didn't look back to see his reaction. I just wanted to find a quiet corner to breathe before I ordered an Uber and got the hell out of there. But Victoria wasn't done with me yet. About 15 minutes later, her personal assistant tapped me on the shoulder, looking terrified. "Mr. Vance," she squeaked. "Miss Sterling wants to see you in the Emerald Suite." Immediately, I walked into the private VIP suite to find the party atmosphere completely gone. The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. Victoria was pacing back and forth, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. Julian was sitting on a velvet sofa, clutching a tumbler of scotch, looking for all the world like a wounded puppy. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, Victoria spun around. Her eyes were blazing with a cold, corporate fury. "Who do you think you are?" she hissed, stepping into my personal space. "Julian is the future of this company. He is a key asset, and you just treated him like garbage in front of our biggest investors." I looked at Julian. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared into his drink and mumbled, "It's not just the coat, Victoria. It's his energy. He looks at me like he wants to hurt me. It creates a hostile work environment. I can't be creative when I feel threatened." I almost laughed. The only thing threatening Julian was his own incompetence. "He feels threatened?" Victoria repeated, turning back to me. Her voice dropped into a dangerous octave. "You are going to fix this, Liam. Tomorrow morning, at the emergency board meeting, you're going to publicly apologize to Julian. You will admit that you were jealous and unprofessional." I stayed silent, my face impassive. "And if you don't," she continued, crossing her arms, "I am suspending your salary effective immediately. I'm also freezing the senior technical director promotion we discussed. You'll stay in your current role with zero pay until Julian feels safe again." She paused, waiting for me to panic. She expected me to plead about the mortgage, or our bills, or my dignity. She expected the man who had always supported her to fold. "Do you understand me, Liam?" she demanded. "Apologize or you're done." For a long moment, the only sound in the Emerald Suite was a faint hum of the city outside the window. I looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and realized that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the girl I had met in grad school. That girl had been passionate, driven, and kind. The woman standing here now was a stranger, a corporate monster consumed by her own reflection. My mind flashed back to 3 years ago. Vortex was on the brink of bankruptcy. Investors were pulling out, and the original code was a buggy mess. I had spent 6 months sleeping under my desk, fueled by stale coffee and sheer willpower, rewriting the entire back-end architecture from scratch. I built the Vortex core, the very engine that was now printing money for her. I remembered the night I finished it. She had hugged me, crying, promising that we were partners in everything. "We built this together, Liam," she had said. I had believed her. I had signed every patent over the company because I trusted my wife. I thought we were a team. But looking at her now, standing defensively in front of a man who couldn't code, hello world, in HTML, I realized I was never her partner. I was just another asset. And assets can be liquidated. A strange calm washed over me. The anger evaporated, replaced by a clarity as sharp as a diamond. If she wanted a transactional relationship, I would give her the ultimate transaction. I didn't argue. I didn't remind her that I was the only person in the Western Hemisphere who understood how the encryption layer of her platform actually worked. I didn't scream about the betrayal. I just stared at the diamond necklace I had bought her for our 5th anniversary, resting against her collarbone. "All right," I said softly. The tension in Victoria's shoulders instantly dropped. She let out a breath she had been holding, a smug smile creeping across her lips. She thought she had won. She thought the threat of financial ruin had brought me to heel, just like everyone else in her life. "Good choice," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I knew you'd be reasonable. Go home, sleep it off, and I'll see you at the board meeting at 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." Julian chuckled from the couch, raising his glass in a mock toast. "See? That wasn't so hard, was it, buddy?" I didn't answer him. I simply turned around and walked out of the suite. They thought I was walking away in defeat. They had no idea I was walking away to burn their kingdom to the ground. They returned to their party, likely clinking glasses to their absolute dominance over me. Meanwhile, I took the elevator down to the lobby and caught a cab back to our penthouse in Manhattan. The apartment was dark and silent, offering a sprawling view of the city skyline. A view I had paid for, a view I would likely never see again. Most people in my situation would have collapsed onto the sofa and wept. They would have thrown things, screamed into a pillow, or raided the liquor cabinet. I did none of those things. I didn't have the luxury of emotion. I was on a tight schedule. Victoria thought her ultimatum was a shock to my system. She had no idea that I had been preparing for this moment for 6 months. It started on a Tuesday in June, when she came home late claiming she had been at a board meeting. As I hung up her blazer, I smelled it, a cloying, musky cologne that definitely wasn't mine. It was Sandal 33, the scent of every ambitious, generic finance bro in the city. Julian's scent. I hadn't confronted her then. Instead, I had started digging. I monitored the company's servers. I tracked the unexplained business trips. I quietly moved my personal assets into offshore accounts she couldn't touch. I was waiting for the perfect moment to sever the tie, and tonight she had handed me the scissors. I went into the bedroom and pulled a single, nondescript duffel bag from the back of the closet. I didn't pack suits or shoes. I packed the essentials: my passport, a folder of physical documents I had notarized weeks ago, and most importantly, my personal laptop, the one with the biometric encryption that not even Vortex's IT department could crack. Once the bag was zipped, I stood before the master vanity. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, yes, but my eyes were clear. I reached for my left hand and twisted the platinum band off my ring finger. It left a pale tan line, a ghost of a commitment that no longer existed. I placed the ring gently on the cold marble surface, right next to her collection of expensive night creams. I didn't leave a note. Notes are for people who want closure, who want to explain themselves. I didn't need to explain anything. The empty space in the bed would speak loud enough. I grabbed my bag, took one last look at the life I built, and walked out the door. The elevator ride down felt different this time. Gravity didn't feel as heavy. For the first time in years, I was weightless. It was 3 a.m. when I found a quiet seat near the oversized windows of the JFK International Departure Lounge. The terminal was practically empty, save for a janitor buffing floors and a few weary travelers sleeping across the vinyl seats. Outside, the tarmac was a desolate stretch of concrete and blinking lights, dusted with fresh snow. I pulled my laptop from my bag and booted it up. The screen's glow was harsh in the dim lighting. I connected to the airport Wi-Fi, bypassed the captive portal with a script I'd written years ago out of boredom, and opened my private email client. There, sitting in the drafts folder, was a message I had written, revised, and polished over the last few weeks. It was a digital bullet with Victoria's name on it. To the Board of Directors, Vortex Global HR, Legal Department. Subject: immediate resignation and activation of Clause 19B. I hovered the cursor over the subject line. Clause 19B. It was a tiny, overlooked paragraph in the employment contract I had insisted on when Vortex acquired my startup 5 years ago. Victoria had signed it without reading it, too busy planning the launch party. Harrison, her father, had glanced at it and laughed, calling it standard boilerplate. They had no idea. That clause stated that if my employment was terminated or if I resigned due to constructive dismissal, like, say, having my salary suspended and my role diminished without cause, all intellectual property rights to the source code I authored would revert to me after exactly 24 hours. Attached to the email was a second document, a signed employment contract with Helix Systems, Vortex's biggest, fiercest competitor, headquartered in London. They had been trying to headhunt me for years. When I called them 2 days ago, they didn't just offer me a job. They offered me a partnership and a relocation package that would make a banker weep. I took a sip of cold water. I thought about the Christmas mornings I had missed because I was fixing server crashes. I thought about the I love yous that turned into do this for MES. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I pressed send. The progress bar zipped across the screen. Message sent. Somewhere in the Vortex cloud servers, a timer started ticking. In 24 hours, the foundation of their entire company would legally vanish from under their feet. And by the time the bomb went off, I would be crossing the Atlantic. The PA system crackled to life, announcing the pre-boarding for British Airways Flight 117 to London Heathrow. The sound was like a starting gun. I stood up, slinging my duffel bag over my shoulder. It felt lighter than it had any right to be, considering it contained the remnants of my entire life in New York. Before walking to the gate, I pulled my phone out of my pocket for one final ritual. The screen was blank, no missed calls, no texts. Victoria was likely passed out in the master suite, dreaming of her own importance, while Julian was probably sleeping off the scotch in the guest room. I navigated my contacts list and found Victoria. My thumb hovered over the name for a split second, not out of hesitation, but out of finality that felt almost surgical. I tapped block caller. Then I did the same for Julian. But when I scrolled down to Harrison, my father-in-law, I paused. I didn't block him. I needed a line open. I wanted to hear the moment the realization hit him. I wanted to hear the panic in the voice of the man who had underestimated me for 5 years. I walked down the jet bridge, the cold air from the gap in the fuselage hitting my face. I wasn't flying coach this time. My new partners at Helix Systems didn't do things by halves. They had booked me a private suite in first class. As I settled into the wide leather seat, a flight attendant named Sarah, ironic, I know, offered me a glass of champagne. Celebration or business? She asked with a warm, genuine smile. I took the glass. A new beginning, I replied. As the plane taxied onto the runway, the snow outside picked up intensity, swirling in chaotic patterns against the reinforced glass. I watched the New York skyline in the distance, a glittering, jagged row of teeth that chewed me up and spat me out. The engines roared to life, pushing me back into my seat. As the wheels left the tarmac, I felt the physical separation from the ground sever the last invisible chains holding me to Victoria. The city shrank beneath me, turning from a metropolis into a grid, then a map, and finally, nothing but lights in the dark. I reclined my seat, put my phone on airplane mode, and for the first time in a decade, I closed my eyes without worrying about a server crash or a CEO's ego. I was gone, while I was somewhere over the Atlantic, cruising at 35,000 feet and enjoying a breakfast of smoked salmon and scrambled eggs. The sun was just beginning to slice through the curtains of our Manhattan penthouse. Back in New York, it was Christmas morning, but for Victoria, it wasn't a day of joy. It was a day of reckoning, though she didn't know it yet. She woke up with the kind of headache that feels like a drill press boring into your temples, the inevitable price of too much vintage champagne and too much arrogance. She would have rolled over, shielding her eyes from the aggressive winter sunlight, and reached out instinctively to the other side of the bed. Her hand would have met nothing but cold, high-thread Count Egyptian cotton. "Liam," she croaked, her voice raspy. Usually, this was the part where I would walk in with a tray, 2 ibuprofen, a glass of electrolyte water, and a hot towel. It was a routine I had performed 100 times. I was a reliable machinery that kept her life running smoothly so she could focus on being the visionary. "Liam," she yelled again, louder this time, irritation bleeding into her tone. "Water. Now." Silence. The penthouse was deathly quiet. She finally dragged herself out of bed, stumbling slightly, cursing under her breath about my incompetence. She probably assumed I was in the kitchen, sulking, or maybe sleeping on a couch in the living room to make a point. She marched toward the master bathroom to splash water on her face. That's when she saw it. It wasn't a note. It wasn't a bouquet of apology flowers. It was my platinum wedding band, sitting starkly on the marble countertop of her vanity. Next to it was her collection of La Mer creams, undisturbed. The ring looked small and insignificant against the opulence of the room, but its message was deafening. She froze. For a second, a flicker of something human might have crossed her face. Confusion, maybe even a nanosecond of fear. But then, the CEO conditioning kicked back in. She scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. She walked to the walk-in closet. My side, usually organized by color and season, was barren. Hangers jangled loosely on the rack. The shelves were stripped. "Unbelievable," she muttered to the empty room, shaking her head. She didn't cry. She didn't call my phone. She laughed, a cold, cynical laugh. "So dramatic, Liam," she said aloud, convincing herself this was just a power play. Checking into a hotel to scare me? Pathetic. She truly believed that by noon I would be back. She thought I was just a dog off its leash, wandering around the block before inevitably scratching at the door to be let back in. She had no idea that the dog was gone, and the house was about to collapse. I wasn't there to see it, of course. By this time, I was cruising over the tip of Ireland, watching the sunrise paint the clouds in hues of violent orange and bruised purple. But I know Harrison. I know my father-in-law better than his own daughter does. I know that he has his email synced to a secure server that pings his smartwatch with high-priority alerts, even on Christmas morning, especially on Christmas morning. Around 10 a.m., the elevator doors to our penthouse didn't just open. They were practically forced apart. Harrison didn't buzz up. He didn't call the concierge. He used his emergency override code, the one reserved for fires or medical crises. He stormed into the living room, still wearing his pajamas under a hastily thrown-on trench coat. His silver hair, usually combed with perfection, was a mess. He didn't look like the chairman of the board. He looked like a man who had just watched his house catch fire. Victoria was sitting on the white leather sofa, sipping a kale smoothie she had ordered via an app, trying to flush the toxins out her system. She didn't even look up when he barreled in. "Merry Christmas to you too, Dad," she drawled, shielding her eyes from the daylight. "Please tell me you didn't bring Mom. I'm not in the mood for her lectures." Harrison didn't return the greeting. He stopped in the middle of the room, his chest heaving. He scanned the apartment with frantic, wild eyes, checking the kitchen, the hallway, the balcony. "Where is he?" Harrison demanded, his voice cracking. "Where is Liam?" Victoria sighed, setting her smoothie down on a coaster with exaggerated slowness. She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed that her drama was interrupting her recovery morning. "Relax," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "He's gone. He threw a little tantrum last night because I asked him to be a professional. He packed a bag and left. He's probably sulking at a hotel in Jersey, waiting for me to call him. I'm giving him the silent treatment until noon." She smirked, picking at a loose thread on a cushion. He needs to learn who holds the leash in this relationship. Harrison stared at her. His face went from flushed to a terrifying shade of pale. He looked at his daughter, this arrogant, spoiled woman who thought she was playing a game of chess when she didn't even know the rules. "You idiot," Harrison whispered, the fear in his voice palpable. "You absolute fool. You didn't check your email, did you?" Victoria frowned, sensing the shift in the room's temperature. "My email? It's Christmas, Dad. I'm offline." "He's not in Jersey, Victoria." Harrison screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "He's gone. And he didn't just leave the apartment. He triggered the nuclear option." Harrison reached into the deep pocket of his trench coat and pulled out his tablet. He didn't hand it to her gently. He threw it onto the sofa cushion beside her with enough force that it bounced. "Read it," he barked. "The email sent at 3 a.m. Read the attachment." Victoria picked up the device, her brow furrowed in annoyance. She swiped the screen, her eyes scanning the legal document I had attached. I can picture it perfectly. Her eyes darting over the words resignation, constructive dismissal, and Clause 19B, without truly grasping their weight. To her, contracts were just things lawyers argued about while she drank espressos. "So he quit," she said, tossing the tablet back down. "Big deal. We'll hire a new CTO. We'll hire 10 of them. I'll get headhunters on it tomorrow. Why are you acting like the building is on fire?" Harrison grabbed his hair, letting out a groan of pure frustration. He walked over to the window, staring out the city, then spun back around. "You don't get it, do you? You never bother to learn how the sausage is made." Harrison spat. "When we acquired Liam's startup, he insisted on a reversion clause. I agreed to it because I thought, hey, he's family. He's never going to leave. It says that if he resigns due to mistreatment or salary suspension, the intellectual property rights to the Vortex core revert back to him after a 24-hour grace period." Victoria blinked. "The core? You mean the back-end stuff?" "I mean everything." Harrison shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "The core isn't just back-end stuff, Victoria. It's the proprietary algorithm that runs our predictive modeling. It's the encryption that secures our banking clients. It's the AI that optimizes our logistics partners. 80% of our revenue stream runs on code that Liam Vance legally owns. He pointed a shaking finger at the digital clock on the wall. The timer started when he sent that email. We have less than 16 hours before his license to us expires. If he doesn't rescind that resignation, or if he signs a deal with a competitor, we are stealing his property every second the servers are running. We will be sued into oblivion, and the platform will go dark. Victoria finally sat up straighter. The arrogance was beginning to crack, replaced by the dawning realization that she might have just bet the entire company on a bluff and lost. But he wouldn't, she stammered. He loves his company. He built this company, Harrison corrected her coldly, and you just evicted him from it. The silence in the penthouse was shattered by the vibrating hum of Harrison's phone. It wasn't a call. It was a priority alert from the General Counsel Vortex. Harrison looked down at the screen, and I can only imagine the sensation of his heart dropping into his stomach. He didn't just go pale. He went gray. He looked like a man watching a tsunami crest over the horizon while standing on the beach. He looked up at Victoria, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the device. The lawyers just opened the second attachment in Liam's email, Harrison whispered. His voice was no longer angry. It was defeated. It was the voice of a man who knew the war was over before a single shot had been fired. Victoria, still clinging to her delusion of control, poured herself another glass of water. Okay, so he attached a letter. What is it? A demand for a raise? A list of grievances? We can pay him off. Dad, everyone has a price. Harrison stared at her, his eyes wide with horror. It's not a demand, Victoria. It's a notification of transfer. Victoria paused, the glass halfway to her mouth. She blinked, her brain struggling to process the terminology. Transfer? Transfer where? To the London branch. No! Harrison choked out, stepping closer to her, invading her personal bubble with the terrifying reality of the situation. Not our London branch. He's accepted a partnership at Helix Systems. The glass slipped from Victoria's hand. It hit the marble floor and shattered, sending shards of crystal and water everywhere. Neither of them moved. Helix Systems wasn't just a competitor. They were our arch-nemesis. They were the only other company with the infrastructure to rival Vortex, and for years, the only thing holding them back was that their algorithm was slower than mine. Helix, Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. He wouldn't. He did, Harrison said, holding up the tablet with the proof. And because you suspended his salary without cause, you voided his non-compete agreement. He is legally free to take his personal IP, the core, and implement on their servers. The transfer initiates in... He glanced at his watch. 12 hours. Harrison looked at his daughter, pleading for a different answer, praying for a loophole. Please, Victoria, tell me you didn't trigger the escalation clause. Tell me you didn't actually send a memo to payroll to freeze his accounts. Victoria's frozen, arrogant smile was gone, replaced by a look of absolute hollowness. She stared at her father, blinking rapidly. Send what? She asked. Harrison screamed, throwing his hands in the air. The suspension order. The email that proves he was constructively dismissed. If you sent that, you handed him the gun he just used to shoot us. I wasn't in the room for the fallout, but I didn't need to be. I've worked in this industry long enough to know exactly how the dominoes fall. Bad news in the tech world doesn't wait for the opening bell on Wall Street. It travels through encrypted signal chats and leaked memos at the speed of light. By noon on Christmas Day, the story broke on TechCrunch and Bloomberg. The headline was simple, brutal, and effective. Vortex CTO Liam Van's defects to Helix Systems. IP dispute threatens core infrastructure. That single sentence was a death knell. Back in the penthouse, the atmosphere shifted from panic to absolute chaos. Harrison spent the next 2 hours screaming into his phone, trying to reach board members who were in Aspen or the Swiss Alps with their families. But he wasn't calling to wish them a Merry Christmas. He was calling to tell them that the company's valuation had likely just evaporated. Even though the markets were closed, the futures indexes were already reacting. Vortex stock was projected to open down 60% the moment the trading floor unlocked. The phones began to ring. Not the press, the clients. The chief information officers of major banks and logistics firms, the people who actually understood the technology, were calling Victoria's personal line. They weren't asking for refunds. They were demanding assurances she couldn't give. They knew that without my encryption keys, which were tied to my employment status, their data was legally compromised. And then there was Julian, the man Victoria had humiliated me for. The future of the company was watching the empire crumble in real time. He saw Harrison sweating through his pajamas. He saw Victoria curled up on the sofa, clutching a pillow, unable to answer phone. He looked at the chaos, and he did exactly what parasites do when the host body starts to die. He detached. He stood up, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror, smoothing down his hair. "I think I should go," Julian announced, his voice devoid of any empathy. "This seems really heavy. I don't want to get in the way." Victoria looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Go? Where are you going?" "I need you here. We need to spin this." Julian let out a short, nervous laugh, backing away toward the door. "We? You're the CEO, babe. I'm just the VP of marketing. And honestly, I can't be associated with a brand implosion this early in my career. It's bad for my personal equity." He grabbed his coat, the one I had dumped on the dirty champagne glasses the night before, and walked out the door without even saying goodbye. Victoria watched him leave, realizing too late that the only person who had ever truly had her back was currently landing at Heathrow, 3,000 miles away. Fast forward 3 months. While New York was presumably drowning in lawsuits and shareholder meetings, my life had undergone a quiet, radical transformation. I was no longer the invisible husband or the undervalued engineer. I was a senior partner at Helix Systems, working out a corner office in the Shard with a panoramic view of the River Thames. The transition had been seamless. The code I brought with me, my code, integrated perfectly into Helix's infrastructure. We launched the update in February, and the tech world called it revolutionary. For the first time in my career, I wasn't fighting for recognition. My partners, British engineers with dry wit and brilliant minds, listened when I spoke. There were no scream fests, no ultimatums, and absolutely no gala coats to check. But the biggest change wasn't professional. It was personal. I met Emma on a rainy Tuesday in a coffee shop near Borough Market. She wasn't in tech. She wasn't a CEO. She was a landscape architect who spent her days designing roof gardens and public parks. She had dirt under her fingernails and a laugh that made you want to tell her your darkest secrets just to see if she could make them light again. On our third date, we walked along the South Bank. I told her a simplified version of my past, that I had left a toxic job and a toxic marriage back in the States. I expected her to ask about the money, or the company, or the scandal that was still occasionally popping up in the business news. Instead, she stopped walking, pulled her coat tighter against the wind, and looked at me with genuine concern. "That sounds exhausting, Liam," she said softly. "Are you sleeping better now?" That simple question nearly broke me. Victoria had never asked if I was sleeping. She only asked why I wasn't working. Emma didn't care about the patent portfolio or the stock options. She cared about the human being standing in front of her. For the first time in years, the knot of anxiety in my chest unraveled. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I had traded a penthouse of cold marble and colder hearts for a smaller flat in Kensington filled with books, plants, and actual warmth. I thought I had lost everything when I boarded that plane, but looking at Emma, I realized I hadn't lost a thing. I had simply taken out the trash. Karma, as they say, has no deadline. But sometimes it arrives on a drizzly Tuesday afternoon in London. I was walking out the lobby of the Shard, checking my watch. I was meeting Emma for an early dinner at a little Italian place she loved, and I was actually excited about it. I wasn't dreading a business meeting or rehearsing an apology for a perceived slight. I was just a man going to meet his girlfriend. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the gray drizzle. I opened my umbrella, preparing to hail a cab, when a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. At first, I didn't recognize her. The woman standing there was wearing a trench coat that looked slept in. Her hair, usually a helmet of perfect blonde waves, was limp and plastered to her forehead by the rain. She had lost weight, too much weight. Her cheekbones looked sharp enough to cut glass, and there were dark, heavy bags under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. "Liam," she said. Her voice was thin, trembling against the noise of the city traffic. I stopped. My heart didn't race. My stomach didn't drop. I just felt a profound sense of pity. "Victoria," I said calmly, "you look tired." She let out a choked sound, half laugh, half sob. She stepped closer, disregarding the rain soaking her shoulders. "Tired? Liam, I'm destroyed. Vortex is gone. The stock was delisted yesterday." She reached out, grabbing the sleeve of my jacket. Her grip was desperate, like a drowning swimmer clutching at driftwood. "Dad had a heart attack last week." She spilled the words out quickly, panic rising in her throat. "It was minor, but the stress, Liam, the lawsuits. The investors are suing us for fraud because the system doesn't work without your code. And Julian," she spat the name like poison. "Julian downloaded our entire client database onto a flash drive and sold it to a startup in Silicon Valley before he disappeared." I looked down at her hand on my arm. It felt foreign. "I'm sorry to hear about your father," I said, and I meant it. Harrison was a fool, but he didn't deserve a coronary. "But I don't know what you want me to do." "Come back," she begged, tears finally mixing with the rain on her face. "Please, just come back. I'll fire everyone. I'll fire the board. I'll give you the CEO position. You can have 51% of the shares. Just fix the code. Turn the lights back on. Save us." She looked at me with those wide, pleading eyes, truly believing that the promise of a title and shares in a dead company would be enough to win me back. She still didn't get it. She thought I left because I wanted a promotion. She never understood that I left because I wanted a life. I couldn't leave her standing there in the freezing rain, shivering like a wet stray. Not because I still loved her, but because cruelty is a choice, and I decided long ago that I wouldn't be like her. I guided her into a small, warm coffee shop around the corner, the kind with steamed windows and the smell of roasted beans, a stark contrast to the sterile, glass-walled boardrooms where we used to decide the fate of millions of dollars. I ordered her a hot tea. She wrapped her hands around the mug, her knuckles white, trying to absorb the warmth. For a moment, she looked human again. But the moment she opened her mouth, the illusion shattered. "We can restructure," she started, her voice gaining a frantic, manic energy. "If you sign the rights back over today, I can call the banks. I can stop the bleeding. We can tell the press it was a sabbatical, a misunderstanding." I sat back in my chair, watching her bargain with a reality that had already left the station. She was still trying to negotiate a deal when the contract had already been burned. "Victoria," I said, my voice low and steady. "Stop." She froze, blinking at me. "But the company is dead," I told her, brutal in my honesty. "And I didn't kill it. You did. You killed at the moment you decided that my dignity was a currency you could spend to buy a 24-year-old's affection." "I made a mistake," she cried, drawing looks from the other patrons. "I'm apologizing, Liam. What more do you want? Do you want me to beg? Is that it?" I took a sip of my black coffee, feeling completely detached. "I don't want you to beg. I don't want you to do anything. That's the point. I didn't trigger that clause to hurt you, Victoria. I didn't take the code to be vindictive. I took it because it was mine." I leaned forward slightly. "You fell in love with the power I gave you. You loved the title, the galas, the magazine covers. You never loved the husband who stayed up until 4 a.m. fixing the bugs so you could look like a genius the next morning. You wanted total control? You have it. You are the undisputed CEO of a hollow shell. Enjoy the silence, Victoria. You earned it." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, the fight draining out her eyes as the truth finally landed. There was no anger left in me, just a profound sense of closure. I checked my watch. Emma was waiting. "Goodbye, Victoria," I said, standing up and placing a 10-pound note on the table to cover the tea. "I hope you find whatever it is you're actually looking for. But it isn't me, and it certainly isn't in that office." I stepped out of the coffee shop, and into the cool London air. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement glistening under the streetlights. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of wet concrete and exhaust. And for the first time in 5 years, the air didn't taste like obligation. It tasted like freedom. A block away, waiting under the awning of a bookstore, was Emma. She wasn't wearing a designer dress or checking a stock ticker. She was wearing a thick wool coat and reading a paperback, patiently waiting for me. When she saw me approaching, she didn't ask how the meeting went or if I had secured a deal. She just smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached her eyes, and held up her umbrella to shield me from the dripping eaves. "Everything okay?" she asked softly, linking her arm through mine. I looked back toward the coffee shop one last time. Through the fogged-up glass, I could just barely make out the silhouette of Victoria, still sitting alone at the table, clutching a cold cup of tea, the queen of a kingdom that no longer existed. "Yeah," I replied, turning my back on the past. "Everything is perfect." As we began to walk toward the subway station, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out of habit. It was a market alert I had forgotten to turn off. The notification flashed across the screen in bright red letters. "Breaking. Vortex Global files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Stock price hits $0. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I simply swiped the notification away and put the phone back in my pocket. There's a misconception that revenge has to be loud. People think it requires screaming matches, lawsuits, or public scenes. But I learned that the most devastating revenge is silence. It's the act of simply removing your labor, your talent, and your love from the people who don't appreciate it. I didn't destroy Victoria. I just stopped holding her up, and gravity did the rest. I squeezed Emma's hand, and we disappeared into a crowd of commuters. Two ordinary people living an extraordinary life. Narrator outro. And that is the story of how one man's self-respect brought down a corporate empire. It's a reminder to everyone listening. Never set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially if they wouldn't even offer you a coat in the cold. If you enjoyed this story of justice and new beginnings, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to Inspiration Seeker. Turn on that notification bell so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away to save yourself? I'll see you in the next video. Stay strong.